So welcome everyone to the last class or the last session of this class about Sanctity and Sanctuaries, the whole synagogue tour that we've gone over. I believe we're talking about the Golan this week, which I'm really excited about. It's such a beautiful part of Israel. So very excited for that. Real quick, I'll just get into the last couple of classes of the week. So tonight we have at 8:30 p.m. our weekly Parshat HaShavua class on Parshat Balak. I believe we have one of Toronto's own, Rabbi Jared Anstandig. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He's part of the Shari Shamayim community. Maybe you know him. He'll be coming on to speak about the Parsha this week. And then, of course, tomorrow morning, 9:35 a.m., we have Rabbi Kalman's reoccurring class, a closer look at the Siddur. He'll actually be teaching live from Portugal, where Torah in Motion will be starting their tour group next week. So it'll be the same Eastern time, 9:35 a.m., but he'll be on the other side of the world. And then on Sunday, we have Rabbi Menachem Liptag coming back on for, I believe, part 3, maybe part 2 of his Yirmiyahu class at 11:15 a.m. Eastern. So you don't want to miss that one either. That's pretty much it for my announcements. I'm just going to go ahead and post the source sheet one more time in the chat for the people who just arrived, so that you can open that one more time. And I'm going to pass the floor over to Shulie.
Okay. Thank you, Maya. All right. Hi, everybody. We are heading into our final session of this course, short but sweet. And today we are going to the Golan. And let's just do from the beginning here. Okay, so I call this the Golana laboratory for synagogues. The idea being that, and we'll see this in a minute in the map, that there have been so many different synagogues that have been discovered in the Golan. The map I'm going to show you is old. There have been many more since then. And some of it is not according to various theories. As we already saw in the second class, we talked about theories of how we date Batei Knesset, and is there a standard based on the time period, based on the region, and some of the newest discoveries in the Golan are kind of upending that, and it really is a place where there's such a variety and it's such a fascinating area. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a few things at once. We're going to talk about the Golan, we're going to talk about a few specific Batei Knesset, and then we have a few other themes that are connected to our larger picture of synagogues. Now, just as a very quick introduction to the Golan itself, it's an integral region of Israel. It's a very important part of Israel, but it's a little bit different, right? Its geology is different. We're going to see volcanic rock. The topography is different. It's a plateau. It's not mountains, but it's a volcanic plateau. Its history is fascinating because we do have important Jewish history in the Golan, but it's two very separated periods. We have history in the Golan in ancient times, right? A little bit biblical, but the most in Second Temple, Roman, Byzantine period. Then we have a very large gap where there's no Jewish settlement. There's in some periods no settlement at all. And then in modern times, i.e. post 67, we have the Golan being an important Jewish area again. So it's different than a lot of other places. And of course, it has military significance. The water issue is very important. So there's a lot of different issues that we could talk about with the Golan, and we're really going to be focusing on Jewish life and Batei Knesset with a few other things stuck in along the way. The picture that I chose as a title page here is, I don't know if anybody recognizes it. This is the synagogue in Katzrin. Okay, Katzrin, we'll talk a little about Katzrin as we go on. Katzrin is in the southern part of the Golan. Jews lived in the south and in the center of the Golan in ancient times, and this is a reconstructed synagogue, right? The pillars were put back up, but it's in the midst of a Jewish village, and we're going to see a few other places like that. So our themes, right? Our themes are Jewish history on the Golan, the synagogues that have been discovered here, the story of Gamla and the Golan today, but in between those things, we're going to talk about two other final topics in the synagogue. Number one is what were synagogues used for? Okay, that seems like a very obvious question, but you'll see it's not necessarily obvious. And the other one is a fascinating question. I'm just going to do a little bit on it, but really we could do so much more. Inscriptions, right? Even today, you walk into a synagogue in an unfamiliar place and you look around, you look to see the donor plaques, you look to see who the rabbi is. You're always interested in what's written. And certainly in an ancient synagogue where there's nobody around living to tell us what it was like, the inscriptions are very much a window into the soul, not just of the synagogue, but of the community. So we're going to take a look at inscriptions. Okay, the reason I brought this map, some of you may remember this map from, I don't know, the first or the second class, I think, right? This is a map that's about 20 years old, and it's the sites of all of the ancient synagogues that were discovered. And of course, we can see that there is a huge prevalence of Bate Knesset here in the north, right? And in the north, in the Golan itself, you have quite a lot of Bate Knesset, right? The Golan is the eastern side of the Kinneret, and there are quite a few that were not yet discovered that are not on this map. So you really have a lot of different possibilities. We are going to be going to Gamla. We are going to El Kanatir. Okay, we are going to go to Katzrin. And we're going to talk about a synagogue that was really only begun to be excavated a few years ago, and it's down here near Nov, and it is called Majdulia. Okay, and I think that's all of our Golan synagogues that we're going to look at today, but it'll give us a little bit of a feeling. Some of these places, there's very little that's left, right? Dabura, Dvora, right? It is just a lintel from the Beit Knesset. There's not so much, but we do have enough evidence to tell us that there was a community here and that there was a synagogue here. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's take a look at the timeline for a minute. Period that we'll talk about a little bit, not connected to our story, but it's important to know. There's a very significant prehistoric culture in the Golan, right? We're going to talk about the oldest piece of art in the world. It's discovered in the Golan. You'll see it in a few minutes. But we have a lot that's discovered from the Chalcolithic period, from about 6,000 years ago. We have a particular culture that's actually named after the Golan, a little bit closer to our times, a little more familiar in terms of Tanakh. Early to Middle Bronze Age, we have Canaanite cities. We have dolmen, which is this burial pillar. We'll see it in a little bit. Okay. We have an important Israelite settlement here. Now, what's interesting about the Golan, and we'll see this in a minute on the map, is that it's over the Jordan, right? It's the Transjordan. So Transjordan, or as we call it, Ever HaYarden in Hebrew, is partly Israelite, or partly and sometimes Israelite, and partly and sometimes not Jewish, right? We have the Arameans, we have the Moabites, we have the Edomites. Those are much further south. Here it's really the Arameans and the Geshurim, later on the Crusaders and the Greeks, right? So you have Jewish communities, but you also have non-Jewish communities. The Israelite settlement, it finishes in 732 when the Assyrians come and they invade. This is a precursor to the exile of the rest of the northern kingdom, of the rest of the kingdom of Israel, which happens 10 years later. But basically the earlier part of the conquest of the Assyrians is in the north. Okay, Second Temple times, it begins, Second Temple period, this begins as a very Hellenistic place, right? Not Jewish at all. But by the time we get to the story of the Hasmoneans, the story of Hanukkah, then you already have Jewish communities that are here. And this is becomes a very important Jewish area. Gamla falls in the year 67, the beginning of the Great Revolt against the Romans. One of the big questions that we're attempting to answer is what happens here from the time of the Great Revolt until like the 2nd, 3rd century of the Common Era. And the theory used to be that there was very little Jewish community here because we didn't find so much. Now we're starting to find more, and based on pottery and based on some small structures that we're finding, it seems that the Jews of the Golan really did rehabilitate themselves very soon after the Roman conquest, and then very soon again after the Bar Kokhba revolt. And you seem to have a continuity of Jewish life that goes in most places up till 749, right? 749, huge, terrible date in Israel's history, this massive destructive earthquake. And that kind of empties out this whole area, and there really is a period of nomads and lawlessness and very little actual settlement. From the 1260s, you have the Mamluks who are here. You have a little bit of the Crusaders, mostly the Mamluks, but again, not so much settlement that's here. The Ottomans as well, much of it is abandoned, and it's only in the very late Ottoman period that people start coming back. Okay, it becomes French and then independent Syria. It's under Syrian control until 67. And then what we're going to do at the very end is we'll take a look at post 6-Day War, what happens in the Golan when it's under Israeli sovereignty. Okay, so that's just to give us a big picture. Like I said, we're not going to go, sorry, wrong direction. We're not going to go into everything, but just to kind of have a big picture of what's going on. So to take us back to the very beginnings, okay, the Golan was created by volcanoes. So where are we here in this great topographical map? Here we are, Ramat HaGolan, right? The Golan Heights or the Golan Plateau, as opposed to places like Shomron, Samaria, or Yehuda, or the Galil. We don't have mountains. We have a plateau. Now, the height is not uniform everywhere. Further north, it's higher, but it's more uniform than a mountain. And what you can see in this cute little map is this line over here of extinct volcanoes, right? The extinct volcanoes have really created the Golan. Today we call them tells, even though they're not tells, right? They're not archaeological excavations, but they're called tells, and they're like these little hills that you see all along the eastern edge of the Golan that became very important militarily for the Syrians and then for the Israelis. The oldest of the volcanoes are in the south. Okay, the volcanic eruptions start in the south about 4.5 million years ago. The youngest volcanoes are very far in the north. They're about 120,000 years ago. Okay, the average height here is about 1,000 meters, about 3,000 feet. Okay, just to give us a little bit of a sense of topography, which is important. The other thing that the volcanoes do is create what the ground is made out of, what the rocks are made out of, and that's basalt. Okay? Basalt is the rock of the Golan, this nice grayish black stone, as we saw it in the Katzrin building. Most of the buildings in the Golan are made out of basalt. The volcanoes create various other phenomena. One of these, this fabulous picture over here, this is called a caldera. This is Mount Avital. And as you can see, if you can see, I hope, you can see that the middle is like a sunken in volcano. It's a volcano that's collapsed upon itself. Okay, so all of these things, the volcanic soil, the volcanic rock, all of it impacts on the nature of the Golan, right? Basalt is a very sealed rock. It's not like limestone or chalk that's very absorbent. So the water is conducted very nicely, and it goes into pools or it goes into underground reservoirs, right? So the volcanoes actually have a lot of an effect on the Golan. Like we said before, it's a center in prehistoric times. This is not the Kinneret. This is called Birkat Ram. It's a volcanic crater that got filled up with water. It's all the way in the north. You can see in the background here, this is the Hermon. Okay. There is some very, very, very early settlement in the Golan. And what I mentioned before, well, first of all, we have some flint tools. We have some houses that go all the way back very, very early. But this, which is actually in the Israel Museum, this is considered to be the oldest piece of art in the world. I know you're looking at it and you're saying, art, really? Okay. But if you look at it a little more carefully and with a little bit of imagination, right, you can see that it's sort of like a face, right, with two breasts. Okay, this is supposed to be a female figure, meaning it's not just a rock. It's a rock that somebody formed into something. This is 250,000 years old. Okay. What was it used for? Unclear, right? Was it a piece of art? Was it a ritual object? We don't know, but it does tell us that there's human settlement and relatively sophisticated stage of human settlement in the Golan quite a long time ago. Okay, just two other short things about prehistory, and then we'll go into things that are more connected to our sources. We have two strange things here. One is this, okay, on the left here, this is called Ruja Mahiri. It's in the central Golan. And if it reminds you a little bit of Stonehenge, right, it does look a little bit like Stonehenge. It's these actual rather large stone monuments. They're about 5 meters tall, about 15 feet tall. It's hard to tell that from the aerial picture. And it's in these circles, right? So what is it? Is it a calendar? Is it a ritual site? Is it something with astronomy, right? The same questions we have about Stonehenge, we have about this site. We don't really know exactly when it's from, right? The suggestion is it's from the late Bronze, from about 1500 BCE, but nobody knows for sure. More easy to understand are these on the right here, okay? These are called dolmens. They are tombs that are made out of basalt, and you can see that they have this nice little U shape, or not U, what do I want? Pie shape, I guess, right? There are many of them, 6,000 scattered all over the Golan. So this is also part of this Chalcolithic culture, this culture that is before the time period of Tanakh, before the time period of the Canaanites. It's an ancient culture that's on the Golan. Okay, but let's get into our sources. So do we hear about the Golan in Tanakh? A little bit. Not so much. Okay. The most prominent place we hear about the Golan is in the beginning of the book of Devarim. We hear about the cities of refuge, Arei Miklat, right? Moshe sets aside 3 cities on the eastern side of the Jordan. Joshua, when he comes into the land, sets aside an additional 3 cities, right? The rabbis say, why do you need 3 on each side when there are only 2.5 tribes on the eastern side? And they interpret it as the east being somewhat more lawless, right? It's kind of the wild east, that you need more of these cities of refuge. Just to remind ourselves, cities of refuge are for people who kill somebody by accident, and then in order to be saved from the blood revenge of the family, they run away to these cities of refuge. It's also meant to be some kind of a punishment. You should have been more careful, right? But where are the ones in the east? So Moses set aside 3 cities on the east side of the Jordan to which a manslayer could escape, right? One who unwittingly slew a fellow man without having been hostile to in the past. He could flee to one of these cities and live. Betzer in the wilderness in the tableland, right? Here's Betzer down here. Okay, Ramot in Gilad in Menashe, belonging to God, and Golan in Bashan. So this is the first time we hear the word Golan. Okay, and here it's a city, right? We use it as a name of a region, but here it's a city. Golan in the region of Bashan, belonging to the people of Menashe. So this is the area that belongs to the 2.5 tribes, right? If you remember the story, when they're getting ready last year that they're in the wilderness, Moshe is giving his final speeches, and the 2.5 tribes, right? We have it actually not this week's parsha for you, but this week's parsha in Israel. They come and they say, we would like to stay here, right? We would like to stay here on the eastern side of the Jordan. And Moshe gets rather upset with them. He says, everybody fought for you. You're not going to fight for them. You have to come, you have to help, you have to conquer the western side. And then you can go back and you can build on the eastern side. Okay, and they do, and we have cities that are here, and like I said, the Assyrians conquer here, they exile, and Jewish life kind of falls apart here. And then in Second Temple times, it becomes significant and important again. So we are going to zero in on our first site here, which is the town of Gamla. Okay, so here we are in Gamla. Okay, Gamla is on the northeastern side of the Kinneret. So here's Gamla. Okay, this is Ma'ale Gamla, that's going up to Gamla, right? But Gamla is all the way up here, very much on the plateau. Okay, and Jewish life in the Galil, in the Golan, increases as Second Temple times go on, right? It starts out really with the time of the Hasmoneans. Then we have more and more Jews moving up north. Certainly post Bar Kokhba, we have more and more Jews because they're not living in the area of Jerusalem, but they're living here already in the time of Second Temple. So this is where Gamla is located. Gamla has a very strange shape. Okay, and we hear about this already in Josephus. Okay, Josephus says Gamla, in so much that it is like a camel in figure, Gamla, Gamal, right? A camel, from whence it is so named. So we're going to talk in a second about the rediscovery of Gamla. But when you look at it today, okay, everybody, hindsight is always 2020, right? We look at it today, we say, oh, of course it's a camel, right? Of course it's a camel's hump. That wasn't so obvious to everybody, but today we know for sure that that's what it is. So Josephus tells us all about it, and we're going to tell the story of the battles there based on him. It's a strange shape to build a town on, and as you can see from this great photograph, right, you can see that the town is built on the slope. Okay, we're going to zero in on this soon on various parts, but the town is built on the slope. Here's the wall of the town. Okay, and it's not an amazing location, but it's very fertile. There are springs. It's good for agriculture, and it's good to defend because you're high up. You're also very close to the Kinneret. You can't see it so well in this picture, but basically it's right over here. So you're very close to the Kinneret. That's also very good for trade, for all sorts of other things. Gamla is a city that exists now that we've excavated it. We know we found coins here, and coins are what you use to date things, right? The oldest coins that are found here are from the time of Alexander Yanai, or maybe you have a little bit also from his father, Yochanan Hyrcanus. What are we talking about? We're talking about the first and the second and the third generation of the Hasmonean kings. Okay, we're talking about the 100s more or less BCE. From that time until the destruction of the city in the year 67. So not a particularly long-lived city, but a very well-planned, well-lived-in city. We'll come back to the city in a minute. I just put this in because if you go to Gamla, one of the things you see there, besides the ancient ruins and the beautiful nature, is you see these beautiful nisharim, which some people translate a nesher as an eagle. A nesher is not an eagle. A nesher is a vulture. For some reason in English, vulture has a very bad connotation, but vultures are very good and important animals, and without them, there would be a lot more disease. And they are incredibly majestic and beautiful birds, and they nest in the cliffs by Gamla. There was a terrible disaster with the nisharim, with the vultures in the north of Israel. Farmers would put out poison to kill wolves. Okay, the wolves, either the wolves would eat the poison and die, or sometimes the cows, who they were trying to help, would eat the poison and die. Vultures, of course, feed on carrion. They would come to these dead animals and eat the bodies of the dead animals, which still had the poison, and so many of them were killed. And it was really a very big ecological disaster because there aren't so many of them. And so there's a whole project to bring the nisharim, to bring the vultures back to the Golan, and they raise them, and they kind of use Gamla as a place for them to nest in safety, and then they kind of release them into the wild. So they're really incredibly beautiful birds. But let's get back to our story. Okay, so Gamla, people knew the story, right? They knew the story of the revolt. We'll tell it in a few minutes. They knew it from Josephus, but we didn't know exactly where it was. And really, before 1967, in modern times, there's very little Jewish life on the Golan, right? Unlike in places, let's say, like Gush Etzion, that had a thriving community until 1948, and then it was destroyed. There wasn't such a thing in Gamla, in the Golan. There was a little bit of an attempt by Jews at the end of the 19th century, the early 20th century, to settle there, not successful. And so in modern times, Jews really didn't know the Golan. after the 6-day war, the decision was made, and this was done in a few different places, to do an archaeological survey of the whole Golan. What's here? What can we find? What's worth exploring, right? It was headed by this gentleman, Shmaryahu Gutman, who died about 25 years ago. He was a brilliant archaeologist. He worked a lot on Masada. And he knew about Gamla, of course, from Josephus, and he wanted to find it. And he and someone else named Yitzhaki Gal come and they see this crazy mountain, and they know the passage in Josephus, and they say, maybe this is it, right? Maybe this is it. Who knows? Could it be, right? Obviously, nothing was exposed yet. And Shmaryahu Gutman says to the people he's with when they're doing the survey, he says, okay, let's go down the hill and let's see who can find a coin first. And right away, they go down the hill and they find coins from the time of Alexander Yanai, right? 103 to 76 BCE. That's what these coins are. And they realize that this is very likely Gamla, that this is it. And they decide to dig, and they have to figure out where to dig first. Okay. They decide to dig. They see the remains of the wall, right? It's a little bit peeking up on the surface, and they walk along it and they find the spot that looks a little bit nicer. It looks like it was made a little bit better. Now, the wall that they could see was over 300 meters long. They had a lot of places to choose from, and whether it was a discerning eye or it was luck, they made the right choice, because the place that they chose to start digging was where the synagogue was, right over here where the Beit Knesset is, that we're going to see close up in a minute. And it was a very good choice. This was not an easy excavation to do because of the topography, right? Schlepping down, schlepping up, bringing in, getting out the dirt. This was very, very complicated, but they discovered incredible, unbelievable things. Let's move on. So one of the things that's very significant about Gamla, as opposed to Masada, right? Some people call Gamla the Masada of the North. It's this place of a terrible defeat of the Jews at the hands of the Romans. It's the place, at least according to Josephus, where both of the places there's a suicide by the Jewish soldiers. But Masada is a place that we only hear about the end of it in Second Temple times, meaning we hear about Herod, but we don't hear about Masada as a Jewish town. It's kind of a refuge, right? A shelter for all kinds of Jews from all sorts of places who run away and come to Masada. That's not Gamla. Gamla was a town. It was a thriving town from long before the Great Revolt. And it's very much clearly a Jewish town, right? And we'll see that in a few different things. One of them is that we have mikvaot, right? We have mikvaot in the older part of the town, in the Hasmonean part of the town. This is a mikvah. We have another mikvah here. You can't really see it so well in this picture, right next to the synagogue. We have a mikvah that's right near the oil press, the olive press, so that you can make your oil in purity. We have stone vessels, right? All of these things tell us that this is a Jewish town. It's a Jewish town that's very concerned about purity, okay? And we also have something those are things that we find in lots of places, but we have something else that's really very unusual. We hear a lot about it in our sources, but it's very hard to find it in reality, and we find it in Gamla. And that is streets that are halachic, right? What does that mean? Okay, so this is just it's such an amazing thing. Anybody who has learned the Gemara of Eruvin, which is not an easy Gemara to learn, right? And it's all about how do you make streets and alleyways permissible for carrying on Shabbat, right? So here's the Tosefta. Take a look at the bottom here, the last source, the Tosefta of Eruvin, Perak Aleph Halacha Bet. Mavoy sheyesh lo tzurat hapetach. A mavoy is an alleyway. Okay. A major street you can't carry in. This is a very controversial question in Eruvin of today, but an alleyway, a narrower street that has a doorway, even if it's more wide than 10 amot, you don't have to make it more narrow. That's okay. As long as it has a doorway, you are okay. You can carry in that makes it more like a private domain. But Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Hechsher mavoy b'lechayayim. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, I don't care that it has a doorway. That's not good enough. It's too wide. It doesn't look like a private entrance, like a private courtyard if it's so wide. So you have to make it more narrow. Now you can make it even symbolically more narrow. But how do you make it more narrow? With something called a lechi. Okay, what's a lechi? A lechi is a beam that is put up against this entrance to the mavoi. And here in Gamla, we have the entrance, the tzuras hapetach, right, on both sides. But then we have another thing. We have this extra beam, this extra, not a beam, in this case it's stones, but this extra piece. Why would you put such a thing in an alleyway? You want it to be wider so people can get through, so donkeys can get through. No, they put it here so you could carry on Shabbat. And it's one of the very few examples that we have of a lechi. And it's really an amazing thing. Right? You learn about it all the time, but to see it in real life is very, very cool. The other things that we find in terms of halachic streets or Jewish streets, right? There are many entrances and exits. Usually you have one gate, one way into the city. Gamla seems to have a few. And we think that this might be connected to the fact that this is an Ir Miklat, that this is a city of refuge, and you needed to have a lot of ways in and ways out, right? And this is, it's actually mentioned in the Gemara that Gamla itself, not just the Golan, but Gamla itself is a city of refuge, right? Look at the first source up here, Talmud Yerushalmi, Masechet Makot. Ad shelo hifrishu kedesh b'Galil, lo hayta koletet. Kifrish Gamla tachtea ad kivshu et Kedesh. So before they had the city of refuge of Kedesh in the Galil, they had a different city, and that city was Gamla, and Gamla was a city of refuge. So maybe that's why there are all these openings, there are all these doorways. Were they still using cities of refuge in Second Temple times? It's a very interesting question, but maybe this was a memory, right? This was a historical memory that we need to have a lot of doorways. And we also hear about Gamla in the Mishnah in Arachin, where it talks about the city of Gamla itself as going back to the time of Joshua. Now, we don't have archaeological evidence for that, but we do have this literary evidence, right? These are the houses of walled cities, any city in which there are at least 3 courtyards, each containing 2 houses, and which is surrounded by a wall from the era of Yoshua bin Nun, right? And this is also obviously connected to where do we keep Shushan Purim? Not a question we're going to get into. The ancient fort of Tzipori, the fortress of Gush Chalav, ancient Yodfat, and Gamla, right? So this is considered to be a walled city from the time of Yoshua. Archaeologically doesn't work, but interesting to know that the Gemara is already thinking of Gamla as a very, very old Jewish city. And of course, the synagogue, right? Because that's why we're here. So the synagogue is one of the earliest synagogues, right? In our second class, we talked about Migdal, right? Migdal is a synagogue that goes back to the time of the first century of the Common Era. Gamla does as well. Okay, just want to check one thing, sorry. Okay, so Gamla is a very, very old synagogue, and you can see it's very interesting, right? It has that architecture that we already are used to in our ancient synagogues of the benches around the sides. Okay, it's got pillars, but it's got 2 other things that help us to identify it as a synagogue. It's got a mikvah, okay, right next door. Okay, and the other thing it has, and I'm going to take us back just one more time to that original picture. Okay, if you look, you'll see that the synagogue is right on the edge of the city. Here's the wall of the city. Here's the synagogue. And this is something we talked about in the second session or the first session about when do Batei Knesset begin? And Professor Yisrael Levine talks about how maybe it's a transition from the functions of the city gate of the Shar Ha'ir, right? When we move in Second Temple times and Hellenistic times, commerce and other things start moving away from the gate of the city into the center of the city. Maybe the synagogue is a transitional period where we're still using the gate of the city, and so the synagogue might be built in the gate of the city. And that's just a very interesting idea that we have Gamla synagogue here in the wall of the city, and it is a very early synagogue, so that could be, and we see that with Migdal as well, that it's in the gates of the city. So the synagogue is definitely one of the oldest ones, unlike its contemporaries in Masada and Herodian, This was not built by the zealots, by the rebels, kind of refurbishing Herod's palaces for their own uses, but this was built lechatchila. This is built as part of a Jewish town, right? And a Jewish town has a synagogue in it. And since we're in synagogues, we will digress for a moment and talk about what I said seemed to be very obvious. What are synagogues used for? I know what synagogues are used for. They're used for people to come and pray. Not necessarily. Okay, so we have two sources here. One is this amazing inscription. As you can see, it's in Greek. Okay, this was discovered about 110 years ago, 120 years ago, in the city of David in Jerusalem. Okay, French Jewish archaeologist named Raymond Weil, who was looking for King David's tomb in the city of David. He claimed he found it. He probably didn't find it, but undoubtedly he did find this inscription. Now, this inscription was written in Second Temple times, late Second Temple times. We can tell by the way the Greek is written, the script that we have. And it's written while the temple is standing. Okay, but it tells us about a synagogue, and we looked at this inscription a little bit when we were talking about the beginnings of synagogues, but it tells us about a synagogue in the city of David, very close to the temple. Now that's interesting in terms of when our synagogues started, right? Already in the time of temple, we have synagogues, but it's also interesting because it tells us what the synagogue was used for, okay? Theodotus, son of Vetnus, priest and archisynagogus, right? We mentioned this before, archisynagogus, the guy who's in charge, the gabbai, the leader, whatever he is, okay? Son of an archisynagogus, grandson of an archisynagogus, meaning the synagogue has been around for at least 3 generations. Rebuilt the synagogue. What is it used for? The reading of the law, the teaching of the commandments, the hostelry, rooms and baths for the lodging of those who have need for abroad, right? So what are we doing here? We're teaching and we're reading Torah, and we have guests who are staying here, okay? And we have water here. It was established by his forefathers, the elders and Simonites. What are we missing here? Prayer, okay? Prayer seems to come into the synagogue later, right? Post Beit HaMikdash. But the idea that we're using it as kind of a community center, this is a place where people can stay, this is where people can get water, you have bathhouse here, right? That's not how we really usually think of a Beit Knesset, but that seems to be the function of this Beit Knesset. Now, the other source that's fascinating is this Yerushalmi, Masechet Megillah, where it tells us all the things you're not allowed to do in a Beit Knesset. Now, a general good rule is if you have a list of things you're not allowed to do, that means people were doing them, right? Nobody forbids anything that nobody was doing anyway, right? But if you're forbidding something, it's because that was what was common practice and you want to stop that. So what were people doing? Tane bate knesiot ubate midrashot ein noagim bahem kalut rosh, right? That's kind of the heading. Don't be lightheaded. Don't be casual in the Beit Knesset. What does that mean? Lo ochlim velo shotim bahem, right? As opposed to Theodotus here, where they have guests staying there. Here it says we don't eat and we don't drink there. Lo mitailim bahem, you don't do a little nice teal there, which unfortunately we do today. Lo yishenim bahem, very different from Theodotus. We don't sleep in the Beit Knesset. Lo nichnasim bahem lo b'chama b'yimot hachama velo b'kshamim b'yimot hakshamim. You can't take shelter in the synagogue from the heat, from the rain, right? These are not things you're supposed to do in the Beit Knesset, meaning this is what people did in the Beit Knesset. They used it still as like this community center. What do you do there? Aval shonin v'dorshim bahem. You sit, you study, you learn, you teach. Again, not mentioning tefillah. Rav Yeshua ben Levi Omer, batei knesiot ubatei midrashot l'chachamim u'letalmideh, right? L'chachamah u'letalmideh. Really, these places are meant for the elite. They're meant for the teachers, for the students. Either the normal everyday people are supposed to be there, maybe not, right? So very, very interesting. I'm going to look at the questions at the end because I know we will not catch up. Okay, so what happens in Gamla? Gamla is the last city in the north to fall to the Romans. The Romans attack in the north already at the beginning of the Great Revolt. When the Jews rebel against the Romans come and attack. The city of Yodfat, which is a great stronghold in the western part of the Galilee, falls in the summer of 67, and the Romans move on to Gamla, and it's their final place that they're attacking in the fall of the year 67. And Josephus tells us that it's going to be attacked in Tishrei. And that's going to be significant. Okay, they come, they besiege. There are these guard towers and walls that are meant to protect the city, but the Romans relentlessly attack it with catapults, with arrows. We have remains. We've found over 1,500 catapult stones that were discovered, 1,500 arrowheads. Right, they attack the city. There's a couple of attacks. The first time they attack, they fail. The second time they succeed. They manage to break into the city. And this is where you go down to the site. You can actually see the breach in the wall that was still there when the archaeologists came. 2,000 years later, 1,900 years later, the breach in the wall. And one of the other things, and this is something that's also unlike Masada, right? Masada, we don't have a battle. In Masada, before the Romans can get in, the warriors have committed suicide. In Gamla, you have a battle, and that's why we see all the remains, and we can find pieces of armor and weapons. And this is one of the things that was discovered. It's if it reminds you of something, it should remind you of the hook that firemen use when they need to hook the ladder onto a window so they can climb up. This is something that a soldier would hook on to the wall so that he could clamber over it, right? That's what's going on over here. So the Romans finally break into the city. There are fierce and terrible battles. Here are some of the arrowheads that were found here. And Josephus tells us very, very dramatically, right? He tells everything very dramatically, but he tells us how the Romans in the first attack, they are rebuffed, right? What happens? Very dramatic defeat, right? The people turned about and fell upon their enemies who would attack them and thrust them down to the lower parts, right? So on a hill. And as they were distressed by the narrowness and difficulty of the place, slew them. And as these Romans could neither beat those back that were above them, nor escape the force of their own men that were forcing their way forward, right? They're trapped in the middle. They were compelled to fly into their enemies' houses, which were low. But these houses, being thus full of soldiers whose weight they could not bear, fell down suddenly, right? What are we talking about? Fell down. The roof fell down. The whole thing collapsed. And when one house fell, it shook down a great many of those that were under it, as did those due to such as were under them, right? So now you have this whole kind of a landslide of houses. It's terrible. It's disastrous. Now, this looks like they're going to win. Unfortunately, what's going to happen is that the Romans are going to regroup, and they're going to be able to attack again and to win. But just a very interesting supposition, right? When Josephus says the roofs fell in, that's very strange, because we know that roofs in ancient times were built for people to stand on. They're flat roofs. You use them. We hear about this in lots of places in our sources, that you use the roof to dry fruit, and you use the roof for storage, and you use the roof to have a cool place to sleep at night, right? We hear about people going up on the roof all the time. It's very common. Why can't the roof hold the weight of the Roman soldiers? So a colleague of mine, Huey Aumann, suggests, and it's a very interesting suggestion, Josephus tells us that this is all happening in Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. Now, because they're in the heat of the battle, they can't build proper Sukkot. So what do? They remove the regular roofs of their houses, okay, and they put in schach, right? The roofs were redone every year. It was thatch and beams. You could take that away, you could put in schach, and you could have a sukkah. The Roman soldiers, thinking this is a regular roof, are standing on it, but it's not a regular roof. It's the roof of a sukkah, which of course is going to fall in very, very easily. However, despite this rallying by the Jews, they are finally defeated in the second battle, and Josephus tells us that many of the Jews, in despair, rather than surrender or fall to the Romans, choose to throw themselves off the mountain. And that's where we get the idea that Gamla is another Masada, is the Masada of the north. And when Gamla falls in 67, that's the end of the Jewish uprising in the north, and the Romans move south to Jerusalem. But one of the things that's fascinating that we discovered in Gamla, there are many, many coins that were found here. Over 6,000 coins were found at the site, but there are only 6 coins that look like this. They are bronze coins. They are very, very crudely made. They're clearly made by amateurs. The letters are a combination of the ancient Hebrew letters and the new Hebrew letters, but you can read them, and it says Legeulat Yerushalayim HaKuf, for the redemption of Jerusalem, and the word is cut off, and we think it's Hakdosha. The people of Gamla are tying their destiny and their struggle with Jerusalem, right? If we are fighting not for Gamla or for the Galilee, we are fighting for Jerusalem. And that's really how they see themselves. So the city is destroyed. Ultimately, Jerusalem is destroyed. Gamla is not returned to for a full 1900 years. But one of the things that's very significant, because it's such an isolated site, it's not plundered, it's not ruined, and so much of the story is told in the artifacts that were found here. Okay, let's take a look at a few other important places in the Golan. Okay, one of them is a very new excavation that's just been going on for a few years. Somebody named Michael Osband from Kibbutz Nov. I don't know if he's from Nov, but this is right near Nov. And he's been excavating this site, which nobody actually ever knew was a synagogue before. It's called Majjulia, and they're still excavating it. I just asked somebody about it today. They're excavating again this summer. And it's a synagogue that is unlike all of the other synagogues that have been found so far in the Golan, which either you have Gamla, right, pre-destruction of the Second Temple, or you'll see we have Katsrin and Kanatir that are later, right? 4th, 5th, 6th century. This is a very early synagogue. Okay, this is one of the earliest ones. We are not sure exactly the dating, but it seems to be very soon after the Churban, very soon after the destruction of the Second Temple. And that's already giving us clues. Wait a second, we thought Jews didn't move back here. It seems they did. So sometimes excavation of a synagogue can also give us clues into the whole life of the Jewish community up here, because just to find a village doesn't necessarily tell us it's Jewish, but when we find a synagogue, we know that this is Jewish settlement that's up here. So Majjulia is a story that is still to be told. There's much more to be found out about it. We are going to do another short digression and talk about inscriptions. Okay, inscriptions are fascinating. Many, many, many synagogues have inscriptions in them, and they tell us a lot about the communities. Now, in the land of Israel, we have inscriptions in ancient synagogues that are essentially in 3 languages. We have Hebrew, we have Aramaic, and we have Greek. Okay, the language, why do you choose the language that you do, right? Well, for one thing, Hebrew is not a super popular language in the Galilee, right? We do have some Hebrew inscriptions, but it's less common. And in fact, the Gemara talks about this. The Gemara says, B'nai Yehuda hikpidu al lishonam. The people of Judah were careful that they kept their language, meaning they kept Hebrew. But the people of the Galil, lo hikpidu al lishonam. They didn't keep their language. And by the way, they associate that with Torah that was kept and Torah that was not kept. Keeping your language is a very important piece of keeping your Torah. Why would you have inscriptions in Greek? Aramaic we can understand, right? That's the language that people spoke every day. Hebrew we can understand. Hebrew is the holy language. But why Greek? It's not necessarily because they're Hellenized, although they know Greek, right? It's because you have a lot of visitors, people who are coming from abroad. Sometimes the people who are giving money, because many of the inscriptions are to thank the people who are giving money, right? And if somebody's giving money, you don't want to thank him in a language that he doesn't understand, right? When Donald Trump comes and authorizes a community in the Golan, we call it Trump Heights. We don't call it, something in Hebrew, although it's also called Ramat Trump, and also nobody's living there, but that's a separate story. So you want people to be able to read it. So the languages tell us something about who's giving the money, who's living in the place. The way people are described is different in Hebrew and Aramaic than it is in Greek, right? In Greek, often, here's an inscription from Hamat Tveria, you'll have the person's name and their title or their profession, right? Severus, the disciple of, Profuturus, the elder. In the Hebrew or the Aramaic, right? Look at this one from Kfar Nahum. It's much more important to emphasize who is the father and sometimes even who is the grandfather, right? That's a very Jewish way of describing somebody. Chalfu bar Zvida bar Yochanan, right? We have Chalfu's father and his grandfather. Sometimes the inscription will tell you a title that's a very Jewish title, right? In Susia, Zachor Latova Kedushat Mari Rabbi Isi HaKohen, right? Mari as in like sir, the rabbi Isi, who's also a Kohen, right? We have very few Kohanim, by the way, who appear in inscriptions, but they do. And this one from Susia, he appears here. And this guy is also, he's a Kohen HaSofer, he's a scribe. So we get their kind of honorary titles. We even have some people some women who donate. So in the Beit Knesset in Naharan, which is near Jericho, Khalifo Barat Rabbi Safra, the daughter of Rabbi Safra. So we find out that there are not only rich men who are donating to the Beit Knesset, there could be rich women donating to the Beit Knesset. Sometimes you'll get the circumstances of why they're donating. This inscription from Susia goes on, and it says that this Rav Isi HaKohen gave the money at the Mishteh, at a party that somebody was having. And I always imagine the gabbai sitting with the Rabbi Isi HaKohen and pouring him out another really nice, large, glass of whiskey. So, Rabbi Isi, how much are you giving to the building fund this year? Oh, here, drink a little more and then you'll tell me. And I always picture it that way. Inscriptions can also convey to us the values of the town, right? A lot of time, this inscription is about thank you, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so for giving money, but not only. So a few really interesting ones. In the Beit Knesset in Rehov, which is just a little bit south of Beit She'an, we know that Beit She'an was exempted by Rabbi Judah the Prince, or Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, from the laws of Shemitah, of Truma, of Maser. He wanted to encourage people to live there, so he ruled it as outside of the land of Israel in terms of all those mitzvot hatzluyot ba'aretz, right? So in Rehov, in the synagogue there's a huge mosaic, which doesn't have pictures, no zodiac, no nothing. It has writing. And the writing is it's a halacha, it's a braita actually, that tells us what places are inside the land, what places are outside the land, what can you eat, what can you not eat, right? So here's a synagogue that's important for them, that everybody who walks into the synagogue is not looking at beautiful pictures, but is learning the halacha, right? And that tells you a lot about who these people are. In Susia, right, you have, and this is written in Aramaic, in Susia you have an inscription in Hebrew, okay, and the inscription includes a date, which is always a great thing to have in an inscription, right? Shechziku ve'asu something, right? The people who built up something, bishana lichurban habayit, right? We have three dates here. The date to the destruction of the temple, Hashana shel Shavua Arbat Alafim. Shavua is not a week, it's the Shemitah year, okay? And Me'ot Shana Shenivra Ha'olam, right? We don't have the actual date, it's a lot of it is erased. But we have three different calendars here, okay? Years from the destruction of the temple, the Shemitah cycle, and how many years since the creation of the world. So that's telling you this is a community that is not concerned about who is the Roman emperor, who is the king, right? It's very Jewish time, right? And that's also tells you a lot about Susia. In Engedi, we have an amazing inscription that has a whole bunch of things, tells the 10 generations from Adam to Noah. It has not a picture but the names of the zodiac signs and the months. It has the names of the three patriarchs and of Daniel's friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. It has the names of donors, and then it has this very strange inscription. Anyone who causes strife among his fellow men or informs on them to non-Jews or steals his friend's possessions or tells the secret of the city to non-Jews. What's the secret of the city? We think En-Gedi was a town that made this very fabulous perfume from the balsam plant. And we think that this is an industrial trade secret. Anyone who does all these things, he whose eyes roam the whole land and see everything hidden will smite that man and his children and destroy him from the earth. And everyone say amen, right? Nice thing to have in your Beit Knesset. A more cheery inscription you have in the synagogue in Yericho, the Shalom Yisrael synagogue. And this one is also fascinating because it's thanking the people who gave money. But in this case, it's not a personal donor. It's not one person. It's the whole community. So Churin L'Tova, Kol Anshe HaKeilah HaKdosha. Everyone in this holy community, Gdolim Uktanim, big and small, Sha'azar Lahem Melech HaOlam V'Itchazku V'Asu Psipat. And the king of the world helped them, and they made a mosaic. He, as in God, who knows their names and the names of their sons, and their households, will write them with all the righteous people in the book of life, right? It's a beautiful inscription, and it's telling us that the whole community is involved in renovating the Beit Knesset. So it's just a few things that we can learn from inscriptions. Okay, so just go back a little bit, do a few more Batei Knesset. We're almost done. But this is the Beit Knesset that we mentioned before in Katzrin. And it's just an example of the many, many synagogues that we find in the north. One of the most interesting, newly excavated, was only first excavated 20 years ago, and it's been completely rebuilt. This is a place that's called by its Arabic name. We don't know what its Hebrew name was. El Kanatir, the mother of the arches. This is a synagogue, a community that was around for hundreds of years. It was destroyed by the 749 earthquake. The name comes from pools that are covered with arches. You can see in the back here. Question is, what was this? Was it something ritual? Was it an industrial zone? The archaeologist Yeshu Dre suggests that this was a place where they cleaned linen. They took flax, they made it into linen. This helped them to make a very nice living because linen was expensive. And the pools were part of the process of washing the linen. And they were able to build an incredibly beautiful synagogue. Here's a great detail from one of the pillars there. You can see here, there's a lion. See the lion? And he's chomping down on a goat? A goat? No, a sheep. Chomping down on a sheep over here, right? Very nice little detail. Now this synagogue, this El Kanatir, also destroyed by an earthquake, pretty remote. Nobody really takes stuff from it. So they were able to use this really incredible technology. They were able to take out all of the stones of the synagogue. They implanted each one with a computer chip, and then they used a program that kind of put all the pieces together like a puzzle. Right? They put it together on the computer, and then they put it together in real life, so that the synagogue has been completely rebuilt. And this is one of the very nice features of it. We talked about this in a different class, is the Heichalit. Right? This is a place where the Aron Kodesh was, and this is where the synagogue, where the people of the synagogue faced. Interestingly enough, right by the entrance. So anybody who was late, everybody saw you come in. Okay, for lack of time, we're going to go skip a little bit. This is a different city, Hippos or Susita. This is a non-Jewish city, a pagan city, and eventually a Christian city. But I'd like to take us in our last couple of minutes to just talk about the return to the Golan. Okay. The Golan was rediscovered, let's put it that way. The ancient part of the Golan was rediscovered by these two unusual gentlemen. This guy is Gottlieb Schumacher. This is Lawrence Oliphant. They were both somewhat strange, but they did a survey. They found all kinds of ancient synagogues. They're the first ones who found El Kanatir. And we hear a little bit about it, but really very little is done until Shmayahu Gutman, post 67, comes back. The Golan was under Syrian control until 67. It was very much a danger to the Jewish communities down in the Chula Valley, because of course the Syrians had the height. They were able to control the heights, and therefore they were able to shoot down on the farmers and the school children and the communities down in the valley. In the Six-Day War, Israel on the last 2 days, on days 5 and 6 of the war, took the Golan Heights. There was a hesitation in the beginning because nobody knew how the war was going to go. But by day 4, when it was clear that we had defeated the Egyptians down in the Sinai and we had taken back Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria, then the decision was made to go and to take the Golan, which the residents of the Golan had been begging to happen. After the war was over, the Ramatkal, right, the head of the army, Dado Elazar, went up to this lookout point, which is called Mitzpeh Gadot, where today there's a memorial to the soldiers who fought up here. And he looked down at the Chula Valley and he said very famously, Mikan atem nirim gdolim shivatayim. From up here, you look 70 times as big, you people who lived in the valley under the threat of Syrian guns for 19 years. Eli Cohen, we're going to skip, right? 1967 was amazing success. 1973, Yom Kippur War, very, very, very traumatic. We were caught unawares. The army, the government, everybody was very complacent. The Golan was almost lost, and it was regained really through the incredible bravery of ordinary Israeli soldiers. And today, right, Jews have moved back in here. The first settlements are already in 68, the community of Ramat Magshimim. By 73, there were 15 communities. They all had to be evacuated. The women and children were evacuated in the Yom Kippur War, but thank God we were able to come back. Today, there are 33 Jewish communities on the Golan. There's only one city, Katzrin, and that's what you see over here. There are about an equal number of Jews and Druze on the Golan, about 20,000 of each. And that's an interesting story in and of itself. Water, super important component of the Golan, and a lot of agriculture. It's just a really beautiful place. But we want to leave a little time for questions. So let's take a look at what's here in our chat. All right, let's see. Right, the importance of the vultures and that they are the Nesher. I will thank my 9th grade, 10th grade rabbi from Yeshiva Flatbush, Harav Haramati Alav Shalom, who always told us a Nesher is a Griffon vulture. And I still remember that. So anyone who went to Yeshiva Flatbush probably remembers that as well. Okay. The lechi is hard to see. Yes, it's stone. It's a stone. It's another addition to, it's like a double wall. That's basically what it is. Did these ancient synagogues have wooden or stone places for Torah scrolls? Were the Torah scrolls treated with as much veneration as we do today? So we talked about this, I think, in one of the classes. I don't remember which one, but we talked about how, at least in the beginning, there does not seem to be been a permanent place for the Torah, right? There was this movable ark that would go in, that would go out. And we actually have a famous story in the Gemara that talks about in Sipori, how they didn't remember before Shabbat to bring the Torah scroll to the synagogue, and they had to create an Eruv on Shabbat. So certainly in the beginning, the Torah was not necessarily kept in the Beit Knesset. Later, you do have, like we saw that Heichalit, right? We do have a place for the Torah. Interesting if they had any like cautions, right? Like, did they protect them? Like today, we're so worried that someone will steal a Torah scroll. I'm not sure if they worried about that so much. Josephus obviously didn't know the buildings the soldiers were standing on were Sukkot. Actually, Yui Alman, whose theory it was, thinks that Josephus is hinting at it. But it's a suggestion. We don't know, right? Perhaps the roofs collapsed because they weren't designed to support so many people. Yes, very true. Yes, Michal Osban's sister is Yordana. They are a fabulous family. And he lives in Natur. Thank you. Not in Nov, but in Natur next door. All right. Susia is in the south. Yes, Susia is in what's called Drom Har Hebron, the South Hebron Hills, in Judea, and their inscription is in Hebrew. It's not in Aramaic, it's in Hebrew. Not all of it, but a lot of it is in Hebrew. The one about the timing is in Hebrew. Susia inscription misspells creation. Yes, that's true. It says Nivra with a hey, right? That's a very interesting question, right? Spelling, and just because spelling is spelled one way in the Torah doesn't mean that the guy who made the mosaic knew how to spell, right? Or there could have been variations on spelling. So doesn't necessarily mean that it was the accepted usage, but that's what they wrote, right? The ruins remained intact. People did live there. There was like a little Arab village, but not enough that it was worth it to them to cart the stones away. Now, it wasn't intact. It was, broken up, but most of the stones were still there. Thank you, all these nice compliments, but let's see if there are other questions. Any other questions? No. Okay. So everybody, it's always fun. You guys are the most stimulating group that I teach. Don't tell the other groups, but you're a lot of fun. And we will have a class on Tisha B'Av. Rabbi Kelman prevailed upon me to teach on Tisha B'Av. After that, we will have to see. I really do like doing this, but I also, thank God, tourists are coming back. God willing, we will have a trip from Torah in Motion. Stay tuned. And I hope by the winter we'll do another class. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Shulie, my name is Rafael Alman. I'm Yui's brother. And
hello, Yui's brother. Tell him that
he had told me about the article that he wrote and his communication with you about it. Because we went to Gamla with him. He took us to Gamla a few years ago. And but when I asked him last year whether he knew you, he said he told me about the article and his and his conversation with you about the Sukkot and
thank you. So tell him I was makpid to be Omer Davar B'Shem Omro.
Yeah, I will tell him. I will gladly tell him. Yeah, by the way, one of his sons lives in Susia, and he took us there too.
Yes, his son who lives in Susia was my son's 8th grade teacher. So it's a very small world.
Yeah, good. Anyhow, thank you so much. We love your classes.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
I want to tell you that you are absolutely amazing, Shulie. It's a pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you, Ruchama. You guys are a pleasure to teach. I really do enjoy it so much.
And as a matter of fact, I left Israel as a shlicha to Yeshiva of Flatbush.
Okay. So you knew her of Haramati.
Yeah. Anyway, amazing. Absolutely beautiful.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you
Shabbat
again.
shalom.
Shalom.
Thank you. Come back.